What is happening, everybody? Welcome to MLB Live Before Lock. Apologies that we're starting a couple minutes late. This was entirely my fault. I couldn't get my camera to work for reasons unbeknownst to me. So I had to reset everything, and then it just started working on its own after that. But before, camera, it was on, and it was just showing a black screen. So whatever. Technology's the secret plug and unplug trick. It ended up working out for us. But do us a favor as you're watching, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are sponsored by Underdog today. You guys are familiar with Underdog. They got pick'em contests. They've got best ball over there. So anything that you guys are looking for some, additional fun other ways to play DFS, go check out Underdog. They've also got free squares over there all the time. If you sign up with our link, you do get a deposit bonus of up to $100. Show is also streaming over on Playback. I'm going to be on with Josh later on after NBA Live Before Lock, and we'll be watching the NBA games over there. So hope you guys join us. And for now, break down the baseball slate with Matt Belman. Matt, what's happening?
Nothing, man. Happy Monday. Excited to get on here and talk the slate with you. Back to having a Coors slate. Still not great pitching options, but excited to break it down with you.
Yeah, and it's interesting pitching options, right? Because we are going to be talking about a bunch of either shitty pitchers or good pitchers that are in bad spots for different reasons, right? Because like on paper, Dylan Cease, oh cool, he's pitching against the Colorado Rockies. Pitching against the Rockies is always great if you're a right-hand pitcher, but he's at Coors Field. Reed Detmers having a great start to the year. He's looking really good so far, but he's pitching against the Baltimore Orioles. And then all the other options on the slate are generally bad pitchers or some misprices where you got somebody like Brady Singer is super expensive on DraftKings, a little bit less expensive on FanDuel, but I mean, who wants to pay over $9,000 price tag on Brady Singer pitching against the Toronto Blue Jays? So there's going to be lots of stuff for us to break down. If you have any questions for us and you're a Stochastic sub, hit me up in Discord. We'll be answering your questions over the course of the show. Or if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to, you could always share your thoughts or leave us a super chat. We'll answer those questions as well. But I do want to start by asking you about the pitching situation that we have here, Matt. How do you feel about the two chalk pitchers on the slate? We've got, I understand why there is as much ownership as there is that's going to Reed Detmers as well as going to Dylan Cease, but do you think it's too much ownership that's going to them?
It's definitely too much ownership. I mean, I also get it. I feel like I'm in a similar boat as you. The options behind them just aren't good, as you kind of alluded to a minute ago. That said, Cease in Colorado, I know it's a bad Rockies lineup, but in Colorado, in Coors, obviously, and then Detmers against this Baltimore lineup as the two highest owned pitchers on the slate. These are slates I like getting different at pitcher.
And for me, playing out a bunch of lineups, it's the same thing that I mentioned earlier when we were doing the strategy show this morning. I don't hate pitchers like Dylan Cease and Reed Detmers today. They're going to be two pitchers I get a good amount of exposure to. I just assume I'm going to end up being underneath the field on them. When I'm running sims right now, I get less than what the field has. If I was building a cash game lineup out right now on DraftKings, my cash game pitchers would be Dylan Cease and Reed Detmers. On FanDuel, I'd have to think about it a little bit in terms of who I'd want to go to between the two. I'd lean towards Dylan Cease, but still, you're looking at either Cease or Detmers for cash. So we'll start with just the cash conversation because I think that's a lot easier to have is if you're playing cash games, are you going to Cease and Detmers on DraftKings?
Oh, I don't even think it's a question. I think, yeah, you just plug them in. I guess you could make a case for Suarez because he's so cheap, but San Diego's not that expensive. So I think you just plug in Detmers and Cease. For me, though, someone who plays, I think I'm playing 3 lineups tonight, higher dollar type stuff. I probably won't play either of these guys.
And then for FanDuel, if we're just talking about a cash game, would you prefer Detmers or Cease, where you can only pick one of them on FanDuel? And keep in mind, asking for cash.
Probably Cease just because the ownership's there. Better matchup on paper. I know it's Coors, but I think he's the slightly better pitcher and clearly facing a worse lineup. So Cease on FanDuel for me.
And then I think this is also a good talking point here. We've got a talking point from Devin Neiman. He says, I don't understand the Detmers love. Baltimore has a damn good offense. So, yeah, I don't think this is a good matchup for Reed Detmers. Here's the reason, though, Devin, why people are playing Reed Detmers. Look at the other options. You've got the other guys who are priced in this range. Brady Singer is $9,200 pitching against the Toronto Blue Jays. Lance Lynn is $8,400 pitching against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Yusei Kikuchi, who is at $8,200, He's pitching against the Kansas City Royals. The Royals offenses look better as of late. And then you got Brandon Pfaadt, who's on the road pitching against the St. Louis Cardinals. So these are just really not the best pitching options we have. So I'll ask you, and we just got the Padres line. Let's see if there's anything weird in there. So I'm going to ask you then, like, if you had to say why you think the field is getting to Reed Detmers in a tough matchup against the Baltimore Orioles, my answer is simply because the other options suck. And it's as simple as that. It's a small slate with shitty other options. Do you see it the same way, or do you think there's a different reason the field is getting to Detmers?
I see it the same way. I'll just expand on it. The rest of the field sucks, and he's good.
Yep.
Like, he's not a proven ace or anything, but he's always had high strikeout upside. He's been really good this season. He carved up this Baltimore lineup in his first start of the year. So again, I don't feel great about it. I don't want to face this lineup, but in that same vein, I have to roster 2 pitchers tonight. So I understand why people are landing there. We feel exactly the same about this.
We did get a lineup here from the Padres. No Manny Machado in the lineup. Machado is out today, so that is going to change it a little bit. Charles Moran says the MLB show is unwatchable on playback. The screen is stuck on the pre-contest simulator. Do you not want? What do you want to see if not the pre-contest simulator? That's something I would be interested to ask you. But I generally find the pre-contest simulators pretty useful to look at over on the playback stream. But yeah, if there's something else you'd prefer to be looking at instead of the sims, let us know. But yeah, anyway, if we're looking at the other pitchers here, and as far as Cease and Detmers go, just to kind of tie a bow on this, like, I'm going to be getting exposure to these guys, just less than what the field has.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I were multi-entering, I wouldn't cross these guys out. I probably won't play them, as I said, in like the 250 or 888, that type of stuff, because I think their ownership is just going to be even more concentrated. I do think
they're going to be very pop. I mean, if we had to guess the ownership of Cease and Detmers in like the 250, the 888, the $121 single entry, I mean, hell, even like the $12 single entry, I'm going to assume they both come in like 60 to 70% owned.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a tad high, but that wouldn't surprise me. And it just makes it like no Machado is big on this slate because he was one of the most expensive Padres, arguably the best Padre. So now their lineup doesn't look nearly as good, but they're really cheap. So easy to fit Detmers, Cease, and Padres.
So with that now in mind, right? In general, we like Cease and Detmers. We just think they're a little bit too popular. I think the 2 best pitchers on the slate if this was independent of ownership, but it's something we really have to take into consideration with baseball. So now with that in mind, who are the pitchers you like as pivots in this 8K range?
So there's 2 guys I like as pivots. Well, more than 2 guys, but I think Kikuchi is reasonable. He's been good this year. KC is fine. I heard you guys talk about them this morning. Like, they're better than we expected them to be coming into the year, but they're not a scary offense or anything like that. My biggest issue with Kikuchi is you're paying full price for him at 90. Oh no, that's on FanDuel, excuse me. At 8,200, I think he's fine. I also like Lance Lynn. Again, it's the same story with Lynn. You know he's going to potentially really struggle against lefties, dominate the righties. He's been better at limiting hard contact this season, but he has not striking out as many guys. I actually like both pitchers in this game, Pfaadt and Lynn, as pivots.
My favorite pivot to get to here is Yusei Kikuchi. And I had brought that up earlier in the day when Lofty and I were doing the strategy show, but you never know when you get later on in the day, like, is it going to, is the ownership going to change in a significant way? Is there going to be a weather situation that pops up? Things could change as you get on later in the day, but a lot of the things I liked early in the day, actually everything I kind of liked early in the day, I still like now. So if I'm looking at my favorite pitchers to get to in this range, it is going to be Yusei Kikuchi for me relative to his ownership. One thing that really stands out to me about his performance so far this year is that his velocity is way up. And that's been a trend we've seen ever since his first year in the big leagues. His velocity is slowly increased. He was only throwing 92 miles per hour, Matt, his first season in the big leagues. This year, his average fastball velocity, 95.7. So we're talking about a guy who's added nearly 4 miles of velocity to his fastball since he first signed here from Japan. The conspiracy theory part of me, and I don't even know how much of a conspiracy this would be, is just that this is a guy who's 33 years old. He's in the final year of his contract. You never know how a contract year might impact individual players, but I don't think it's crazy to think that Kikuchi just came into the year having put in extra work in the offseason. He's in better shape than potentially he's ever been in because he understands that at 33 years old, and as a pitcher didn't come over to the States until he was 28 years old, this is the last chance for him to get a life-changing sort of payday that could really set him up for the rest of his life. And I think it makes sense that you would say that, like, hey, those are reasons you could reasonably say that you have a career high in terms of overall velocity. And the results 2.08 ERA, 2.63 expected ERA. He's a 33% strikeout rate to a 9% walk rate. There's really good early returns on Yusei Kikuchi, but most importantly to me, that velocity is way up, and that's been indicative of other things. His matchup against the Royals is probably a little bit harder now than we thought it would have been coming into the season. The Royals have been outperforming a lot of our expectations. I do think there's going to be some regression coming forward. I don't think they finished the year with one of the best records in baseball. But if you could get Kikuchi at like half the ownership, which appears to be the case right now, of Reed Detmers and somebody like Dylan Cease, I don't think they're outscoring him a 2-1.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So I like Kikuchi, Lin, and Fat, all because they're not Detmers or Cease. I think all five of these guys are similar tonight because of the matchups they're in, and Detmers and Cease are pulling the ownership. If this game was in San Diego, and well, Cease would be getting even more ownership. But let's say that Cease was the guy who was falling under and Lin was getting a lot of love. Then I'd like Cease. But I think the ownership matters a ton on these guys.
Yeah, and let's see. So our most updated ownership here, we have Dylan Cease projected now for 42% ownership, Reed Detmers 37% projected ownership. But then we've got Yusei Kikuchi at 23%, slightly higher than what it was this morning. But, you know, the difference between 19 and 23% in the context of this slate doesn't make a massive difference. He's still way discounted in terms of ownership compared to Detmers and Cease. So overall, Kikuchi is my favorite pitcher to target in this range.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have zero arguments with it. I see that case pretty clearly.
And then as far as Brady Singer, I mean, he is somebody who is showing up as being under-owned in the top pitchers tool when you consider he's only 2% owned. I do think he's going to end up being a little bit more popular than that just because it's a 7-game slate. He's a terrible option relative to what his price is and what his projection is. The only reason to really get to him would be that he's crazy low owned. I'm just skeptical that he's actually only going to be 2% owned in tournaments.
Yeah, same. And I don't know. I really struggle to get to him anyways. He falls into the same boat as those other guys because the ownership isn't there. It's even lower with him. But you're paying full price, tough matchup, wind blowing out in Kansas City. Again, I still like Kikuchi, but that is a knock for someone like him and certainly for someone like Singer also. So, yeah, I'm out on Singer tonight.
Anybody else that you really like in this 8K range?
I kind of like Brandon Pfaadt. So, couple things with Pfaadt. Our tools like him. He's got a 14% chance of being a top pitcher, 9% ownership. You know, I know Singer is one of the only pitchers with more leverage than him, but Singer's uber expensive. Pfaadt's been good. He's coming off a good start against the Cubs. He was really good against the Cardinals a couple starts ago, aside from a really rough first inning. So I think there's merit in taking a shot on Pfaadt here against an underwhelming, underperforming Cardinals lineup. Not worried about their lineup like at all. So I think Pfaadt is in play, you know, mainly because he's not one of the two guys getting ownership.
We've got a question here from East of Spade asking us about our favorite options for DK tiers. Before we pivot, any other final thoughts on these pitchers in the 8K range before we move on from talking about it?
No, not for me.
All right, so let's answer the question from Ace of Spade. He wants to know the DK tiers best options of the day. And I think there's really interesting ways to get different in tiers. Most notably, you could build a Brave stack that is going to have to forego some pieces from the Coors Field game. So if you're just asking me, who do I think scores more fantasy points more often than not, Fernando Tatis playing at Coors Field or Ronald Acuna, I'm going to tell you the answer is Fernando Tatis. When you consider that the only Padres that we could get to in tiers, it's Fernando Tatis in tier 1, Xander Bogaerts is in tier 5, and that's it. I would rather build around the Braves, and I do think you could have a different looking Brave stack simply by going to Ronald Acuna in tier 1. And it's very odd. Like, in what other circumstance would you say, hey, you could be contrarian by playing Ronald Acuna in a priceless DFS contest? But this kind of is, because I think we're going to see a massive amount of ownership going to Fernando Tatis. So I'm going to say go to Ronald Acuna in tier 2. Then in tier 3, you go to Austin Riley going up against a lefty and Ryan Weathers, and you're getting correlation. Same thing in tier 3. You go to Marcell Ozuna going up against Ryan Weathers, and he's been crushing the ball to start the year. And Ozuna's always been a hitter who hits left-hand pitching really well. So we've got a 3-man Brave stack here. And then when you start to get into some of the other tiers, then you can just play some of your other top favorite players. So like tier 4, I think Xander Bogaerts makes a lot of sense. And then there are other stack options in tier 5 and tier 6. I like the Blue Jays, so I will say Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in tier 5, and then Bo Bichette in tier 6. So those are my favorite options in each tiers, but I think it's very interesting getting away from a Coors Field spot with Fernando Tatis. Obviously scary if he goes out and hits a homer or even hits a couple of homers, but it's very rare. You're going to be able to build a Brave stack that's both contrarian and is Ronald Acuna in it. So that's where I like to go for tiers tonight there, Ace of Spade. Thank you very much for the super chat. Let me check Discord to see if we have any questions. And just because Jordan just messaged me, I know you're saying that my connection isn't good in playback. Is it an issue on YouTube or in Zoom? Because it looks okay here. All right, so that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would my connection be okay in Zoom and YouTube, but not playback? It don't make no sense, Jordan Klein. I'm a man of math and logic, and I can't understand that. So I don't know. I'm doing my best. I'll reset. I already reset everything before the show. I'll try resetting it again after the show before I go on the playback show tonight with Josh. But that aside, let's start to look at some of the cheaper pitching options. And we did get a question from Einsteinium in Discord to kick this off here, Matt. He wants to know, what are our thoughts on Keaton Winn tonight? Keaton Winn pitching against the New York Mets. He's very cheap at 7K. There's no reason to consider him over on FanDuel. On DraftKings, though, he is somebody who is cheap. He's picking 11% ownership. There's a ton of pitchers who are 11 to 20% owned today. We have, outside of Dylan Cease and Reed Detmers, almost every pitcher is 11 to 20% owned today. Keaton Winn falls into that category as well. Is Keaton Winn somebody you have your eye on?
Not really. I don't mind it. I don't really feel strongly about any pitchers on this slate aside from Detmers and Cease getting too much ownership. So I think playing anyone else is viable, really. And you can spin a story however you want it. And that obviously goes all the way down to Suarez. I don't like the matchup against the Mets. They don't strike out a lot. They've actually been pretty good to start the season, hot recently. But I don't think he's all that different from like a Brandon Pfaadt.
Yeah, so when I'm looking at the cheap pitchers, Keaton Winn, I mean, I have 6% of Keaton Winn. That's a little bit less than what the field has. If somebody sent me a lineup on Twitter and said, it is Keaton Winn in it, like, do you have an issue? I'm probably going to say that's fine. I don't really care, but I'm not going out of my way to roster Keaton Winn. If somebody told me they had an individual lineup with Keaton Winn, I wouldn't have an issue with it. If somebody said to me, I have Keaton Winn in 40% of my lineups, I would say, dial back your Keaton Winn exposure. He's just a pitcher that kind of exists on the slate. I have other pitchers I prefer to get to in the 7K range. Actually, let's just include all the punt options together, because I want to talk about Albert Suarez. To me, relative to his price and ownership, he's the best overall pitcher on the slate, Matt. This guy is 4K.
I know.
4K. So the flat min in a decent matchup against the Angels, he looked pretty good in his first start of the year. And also, I don't understand how his price didn't change, considering that he had a good outing his first time out and pitched a shutout. I'm not saying he should be the most expensive pitcher in the world, but how does he remain $4,000 on DraftKings and $5,500 on FanDuel? He should just be a couple thousand more expensive on each site. You're unmuted, by the way.
Oh, sorry about that. I should be good now. So I'm not buying what he's selling. I know you were on him the last start. If I were on him the last start, I'd probably feel differently here. I think he got by with a lot of smoke and mirrors, even though you're right, he looked better than expected. That said, he's way too cheap. Like, he should be in the 6K range at worst. 4K for a competent starter against this Angels lineup. I feel queasy about it, but I completely understand your take why he's like the best points per dollar pitcher on the slate. I mean, he's got close to a 50% chance of being the top value guy. So I get it.
And when you consider there's a Coors Field game, I know that almost all of his exposure that's going to Suarez is probably going to be people playing the Padres offense with Suarez. So like, you don't even really need the salary savings now that
No,
Machado isn't starting for the Padres. But I still view him as being better than most of the pitchers that are more expensive. Like we got the question about Keaton Winn. If Albert Suarez was $7,000 and Keaton Winn was $7,000, I would still prefer Albert Suarez. So one way I think you can get different with some Suarez lineups, if you have Suarez and you're leaving like $1,000 in salary on the table, there's a pretty good chance you have a different lineup build than what a lot of the field has. This is my favorite overall pitcher on the slate in Albert Suarez. Is that crazy to me, or does it make sense?
it's not crazy, but it's not for me. Like, again, I remember the last slate he was on, it was that day slate, and you were on him hard against some team. I can't even remember now. And he was really good. He was awesome that slate. So why wouldn't you go back there in an even better spot against the Angels? It's still a mispriced 4K tag. Like, considering the pitching options, I don't think you're crazy in your Keaton Winn take. I might feel differently, but at the end of the day, we don't have to worry about it because Suarez is not 7K. So I guess my biggest thing is with Machado out of the lineup, I do think a lot of the Suarez lineups are just going to be funneled with Braves. So I don't think you're crazy talking about leaving some salary there.
And we do have the Angels lineup because it came out a few minutes ago. Somebody brought it up in chat. It was, where is it? Yeah, Larry C said, Angels lineup came out. It's trash. Yeah, there is no possible way for the Angels to field a good lineup. Like, unless they're, reviving Ted Williams. It's actually, here's what's more realistic. There's a better chance of the Angels bringing dead Hall of Famers back to life and putting them in their lineup than somehow acquiring them at the trade deadline over the course of the season. So yeah, this is the lineup that they're putting out there tonight. Shanuel, Trout, Ward, Sano, Moniak, Adele, O'Hop, Adrianza, and then Neto. It's not just a bad lineup. That is a ton of strikeouts in the lineup. They've got Sano right in the middle of the lineup. If you guys remember, he was at one point one of the top hitting prospects in baseball. He had a lot of power upside, and he was good in the early portion of his career, but then just couldn't stick in the big leagues because of the amount that he would swing and miss. And now he's batting fourth for the Angels. I really view there being a lot of strikeouts in the lineup. Now, Albert Suarez, there's a reason that he's, 36 years old, and he was making his first start in the big leagues last time out since, 1984 or something like that. It had been a very long time for him between big league starts. So if somebody in the chat asked, is he a free square? He's not exactly a free square, but I view him as the best overall value option on the slate. And once again, not all that popular.
So I do think it's important to note that, there's a reason this guy is 30, close to my age, 39, and barely a major leaguer. So he's too cheap tonight. He gets a really good spot. Not going to be surprised if he pitches well. Also, wouldn't be shocked if the Angels get to him and he's not very good at all. Doesn't mean that the Angels are the top stack, like they're hitting home runs, but they're still professional hitters with Mike Trout. So I'm a little more nervous about it than you are, but I don't think you're crazy at all to feel the way you do, if that makes sense.
And a big part of it too is the other pitching options just suck, right? So
yeah,
it's not even me saying I guarantee Albert Suarez has a good start. It's just the pitchers who are really popular. Dylan Cease is projected for nearly 50% ownership pitching in Coors Field. That's the level of poor pitching options we have on the slate. So that's where I'm at with options that we have for today. Charles Moran, I didn't know this, said Sano had a movie made about him when he was a kid. I think I saw that one. Two Girls, One Cup, right? It was like a shit that was taken somewhere. Was that the Miguel Sano movie? Something like that. Who are the cheap pitching options you like then? If it isn't going to be Albert Suarez for you, is there anybody else for cheap that does really stand out to you?
No, I mean, I think if you're going cheap, it's Suarez. It's not even a question. I think Quintana for our tools looks kind of interesting. Again, 14% chance of being top two pitcher, 10% ownership. I think Suarez is the guy though, if you're going cheap. I don't think you need it though, which is a big problem for him. So I do think the concern about all those lineups being funneled is a valid one.
Let me see. What else am I getting to as far as exposure goes for some of these cheap guys? It's Suarez for me on the low end. I don't have any of these other cheap guys north of 20% of lineups. I'm looking at what Jordan got to as far as exposure and just the base settings in the Sims. And Jordan also, it seems like he was getting to some lineups with Jose Quintana. He's in 15% of lineups. And yeah, I mean, we've got Quintana projected for 10% ownership. He's in a very pitcher friendly ballpark on the road against the Giants. It's not the most threatening offense in the world. They've got all their pinch hitting scenarios that go on there. So he is likely to face a handful of righties. I don't think the Giants lineup is out quite yet. Let me see. Yeah, I don't see it out as of now. But just based on ownership, if I was taking a chance on somebody else for cheap, I'd go to Quintana. But my preferred option if I'm punting it is Albert Suarez.
Yeah, I just see no reason to spend that extra salary on Quintana. I feel better about him because he's obviously a better major league pitcher, clearly. But I also think Suarez is in a much better matchup. Like the Giants aren't great and they're not scary, and it's a great pitcher's park. But with the additions of Chapman and Soler, like I think their lineup is much deeper than the Angels. So I'm with you on all this.
Hey, I'm Drew 95 in chat said, what are we using to determine our favorite Padres hitters today? Recent performance. No, I don't care at all about recent performance. Righty lefty splits, care about that a little bit. Batting order, that also matters to me a little bit. Yeah, so I really don't look that much at individual hitters. Here's what I change exposures to when I'm building my lineups out in our Sims tools. I change pitcher exposures. If there's like individual pitchers I'll feel differently about. In general, though, I'm more or less playing what I get to in our Sims. But if I am making changes, it's to team stacks or to individual pitchers. I don't change individual hitters. It's not something I really care all that much about.
Yeah, I don't care at all about individual hitters. Part of the reason when I stack, usually, unless it's like a massive slate, I usually stack in different ways every hitter in the lineup. I'll try to get to the best hitters more, but yeah, I don't worry about individual hitters like at all. Probably too little I worry about it.
In general, I'm going to be playing the hitters at the top of the order. The reason that's the case, though, is because those are just the better hitters. Like that's really the reason why. Like if I sort by the Padres,
right, you also get a lot of ownership discount on the bottom half. So I think, especially in baseball, you can make the case for any hitter in a lineup because really, when you're stacking, it's about that offense, sure, but you're playing against the opposing pitcher. And in that scenario, everyone's eating. And you never know. You brought up the other day, Mike Trout can get outscored by the number 9 hitter. It happens all the time. Because what if Mike Trout comes up to bat with no one on base 3 times, but the number 8 hitter comes up with the bases loaded twice? That's the randomness of baseball. So I don't know. That's just how I see it.
So this is going to change because I built my lineups out before the show started and didn't expect that Manny Machado. We just found out that he's placed on the paternity list. Wasn't expecting Manny Machado to have a bit. Like I don't have access to all of the significant others of baseball players and what their pregnancy status is and when they're doing all that. But yeah, it caught me by surprise that Manny Machado is on the paternity list. So the way that I would have looked at this, let's say I was building a cash game lineup and I was trying to build some lineups around like Padres stacks, I would look at the individual hitters I was getting the most exposure to from the Padres, which at least before the show started were Tatis, Machado, and Xander Bogaerts. Nothing really all that stunning there. Now it would be Machado not in the conversation, obviously, and then instead guys like Ha-Sung Kim, he would be elevated. And then also Campusano, because he's a catcher who's hitting at Coors Field, and he's also a competent hitting catcher, and it's just a position that's kind of hard to fill. But those are the guys that I would be looking at the most for cash games. Anything else you want to add about cheap pitchers?
No, I don't love any of them. So your point on Suarez is just like, there's just absolutely no reason he should be $1,000 less than Gomber, like who's out of play on this slate. So it's just a pricing thing with Suarez, even though I don't think he's good or going to last that long, it doesn't matter for tonight.
We have Flynn Flam Man in the chat says Suarez is cheap, but way over-owned. I don't see it that way. I view him as under-owned at 21%.
I view him as just owned. I don't really view him as over-owned or under-owned. The only two pitcher ownership I think matter on this slate are Cease and Detmers. And the one pitcher who's going to be really, really low owned of the competent pitchers is Brady Singer. But that's a pricing and matchup thing. So like everyone else is just going to be owned like appropriately or maybe a little bit less than they should be.
So let's go ahead and talk about some stacks. But first, if you wouldn't mind, Jordan, pull up the lineup generator. Let's build some lineups and see what ends up popping up there. Also, want to let you guys know that today is the final day to sign up for our NBA promo. So if you've been considering signing up to our NBA Sims tools for the NBA playoffs, this is your final chance to get 50% off on your first payment. Tomorrow, deal's going to be going away. And at least as of now, we don't have any plans for any NBA Sims offerings for the rest of the NBA season. Maybe we'll do something come around, like the NBA Finals. But at least for now, if you guys want to sign up for our Sims package, sign up using the link we have below. Use the promo code playoffs. You guys know how to spell playoffs. All capital letters, and it's getting you 50% off your first payment. Also, if you use the link that we have below, it already has that promo code loaded in, so it'll make it simplest for you. But sign up and check it out if you guys have been wanting to test out our NBA product, or maybe you're somebody who stopped playing NBA DFS towards the tail end of the regular season, want to get back into it for the playoffs. Now's the time. Use that promo code playoffs to get 50% off a Sims subscription. But lineup generator time. Let's see what we're getting to in the lineup generator here, Matt. And also, part of our MLB packages, links for that below as well. Any of the packages you sign up for also comes with access to the Discord channel. But let's build all stack types. And let's try to build contrarian lineups. I'm interested to see what comes up in contrarian lineups with being a smaller slate. And don't worry, guys, we'll build lineups for FanDuel after this as well to see what shows up in FanDuel as well as for DraftKings. We'll look at the pitchers we get to in the lineup generator as well as the hitters and stacks. And let's see. Oh, good. I was also something I was kind of waiting for was for some of our projections to get updated. I wasn't sure if Manny Machado would be out yet, but yeah, looks like we aren't getting to Machado there. What is showing up here that is not a surprise, even when we tried building contrarian lineups, Matt, all of the San Diego Padres in the world, our most rostered hitters in order are Tatis, Bogarts, Camposano, Profar, Rosario, Ha-Sung Kim, Azakar, and then we finally get to Vlad. So our top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rostered hitters are all from the San Diego Padres. Stands to reason this is a pretty good stack to be looking at today, Matt.
Yeah, I think that they look pretty good. Again, they're coming in as under-owned in our tool, so I'm not surprised at that at all either. And I'm not sure where their ownership's going to come in. I'm really not.
And something else of note here about the stacking for the Padres, I do think they're going to be crazy. I'm not going to play them in single entry today. We've got like the 222 aluminum. We got the leaderboard contests, right? And it's hard for me to think this team isn't going to be crazy popular for single entry. So I'm going to try to deviate in single entry. The Padres are going to be my most rostered team by a mile, though, in large field contests.
I get that. I'm debating right now whether I want to play them. Again, I'm playing 3 lineups, whether they're going to be one of my teams. I know Colorado will be. So the fact that I'm playing Colorado opens me up to playing some San Diego if I like, because Colorado is going to be really low owned going against Cease. But I would not play San Diego with almost anyone else. Like Colorado's so low owned where I think that I can play San Diego with them. But other than that, I think you're right.
One other team that I think is kind of interesting to build a Padres stack with, the Baltimore Orioles. Because Reed Detmers is going to be so crazy popular. I do think that you could make a reasonably contrarian Padres stack if you go Padres, Orioles as a secondary stack, and the lineup doesn't have Reed Detmers then, obviously.
I agree. Those two teams for sure, because you're facing the most popular pitchers on the slate. I forgot to mention them, but you're right. And there are other teams you can use. The leverage isn't as good. Like the White Sox won't be owned, but then you're playing the White Sox. So
let's look at the stack exposures here, Jordan. It's going to be insanely high towards the Padres, but there are a couple other teams we're getting to. Padres, Toronto Blue Jays, Minnesota Twins showing up in some lineups, as well as the Atlanta Braves. But yeah, it's very, very heavily dominated by the amount of exposure we're getting to the San Diego Padres. Let's go and look at the player exposures. and see what pitchers we're getting to, and they'll build lineups out for FanDuel and see what the FanDuel side of things is looking like. But if we scroll down here, we've got Yusei Kikuchi. We're building a little bit more contrarian lineups. He's showing up in a bunch of lineups. I really like that. I think this is a very reasonable pitcher to get to in single entry if you're trying to get away from Dylan Cease and Reed Detmers. And one other thing you guys will notice here as well, when we're building lineups with the contrarian setting, it is easier for us to get away from the chalk pitchers than the chalk offense. So if I was choosing one of them to get away from in a large field tournament, I would get away from some of the pitchers before we got away from the Padres offense. And also, if you look at our ownership here, we're still getting to Cease and Detmers. It's just less than what the field has. We have 28% of Dylan Cease. We have 23% of Reed Detmers. It's a decent amount. It's just not quite as much as the field. That's also what I'm assuming my makeup, my lineups is going to end up being for today. They're going to be in my player pool, just less than the field, because instead I could get to some pitchers like Kikuchi for lesser ownership and get overweight to him. I could get overweight to Lance Lynn a little bit to differentiate some lineups. And I assume if you scroll down a little bit here, Jordan, let's see what other pitchers are showing up in some lineups. I assume that there's probably a Suarez in here, some Chris Paddock lineups. Let's see, Keaton Wynn. There's Albert Suarez also showing up in some lineups, right around 20%. Or is that 12%? I can't tell if that's a 2 or a 7. It's kind of hard to make out on the screen. But either way, Suarez also showing up in lineups. I'll be higher on him than what the lineup generator is right here. Logan Grew says Greg loves Kikuchi. I don't really love Kikuchi for today. It's just I think he should be higher owned and more in line with where the other high end pitchers like Reed Detmers and Dylan Cease are. Anything else that stands out to you here? If not, Matt will build out some lineups for FanDuel.
Nope, let's do it.
All right, so let's check out the FanDuel side of things, and let's see what we're doing on FanDuel in the lineup generator. And let's do the same thing, all stack options, and then also we'll go contrarian, Jordan. And let's see what's going to look different on FanDuel relative to DK. If you guys haven't done it yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We appreciate it. It's the easiest way to support us for free, and only a couple clicks of the buttons. So I am noticing a little bit more Twins popping up because Kirilloff and Julian are two of our most rostered hitters on FanDuel, which signifies to me that we're getting a little bit less exposure to the Padres because they aren't our 7 most rostered hitters, but still Tatis, Rosario, Ha-Seong Kim, Profar, Bogarts. These are still some of our most rostered hitters. So if you check the stack exposures, it's going to be a lot of Padres, but it seems like there's some other teams as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's going to be a little bit different, but still a lot of San Diego.
Yeah. Click that stack exposures tab, Jordan. Let's see what we have there. Padres, yeah, so 60% of them as opposed to the 80%. And then we've also got 40% Twins, 40% of the Braves, 22% of the Toronto Blue Jays. So let me look back at our top stacks tool and update it and look at the FanDuel side of things. What's different on FanDuel? So one thing that is different about the Padres, they're 19% owned as opposed to 16%. That brings them down a little bit. And then also Toronto only projected for 8% ownership. So that's where they show up in more lineups. And the Minnesota Twins only 9% owned when they have by far the highest odds being the top overall value stack on FanDuel. So those are looking like the best teams to build around on FanDuel in the lineup generator. Go back to the player exposures, Jordan. I want to see our pitcher exposures on FanDuel for a single pitcher site. Same deal. Kikuchi's still our most rostered pitcher. So if you want to be different on FanDuel, Kikuchi looks like a guy to get to. And then we're still getting our Reed Detmers exposure. I'm sure that Cease will be the next pitcher there. Oh, no, Quintana. So there's Cease. Cease right after that. And yeah, some Lance Lynn there. Nothing else all that significant. Kikuchi, once again, does look like the best pivot option as far as FanDuel is concerned. Anything else that stands out to you?
No, I think, no, like I said, it's a little bit easier to get to San Diego, it looks like, on FanDuel, or at least they're picking up a little more ownership. But no, everything looks right in line.
All right, and no other relevant questions here. So let's go ahead and start talking about some of the other stacks, Matt. And we've talked a lot about the Padres kind of in passing, and it's a hard team to not talk about in the context of this slate. If you guys do look at our exposures in the Sims tool, it's going to give you a shit ton of exposure to the Padres, which makes sense. But while this is the team I'm going to be getting the most exposure to in large field tournaments, It's not who I really want to look at in single entry, just because I think there's just going to be such an absurd amount of exposure in smaller field contests. So, Matt, if you were picking one team to stack in a single entry contest right now, assuming it isn't the Padres, or maybe you do want to answer the Padres, who would you stack in a single entry right now? I think they're way different tournaments for the slate.
Colorado for me. I know that they're not great, but I do think that they're a little bit better than the public perception of them. Cease is just getting way too much ownership. So you've got the double leverage here. Colorado doesn't have a real high chance of being the top stack on the board, but no one does outside of San Diego and then to a lesser extent Atlanta. So 6% top stack chance for Colorado, 3% ownership. And that doesn't even put into consideration the amount of ownership that Cease is getting. So this is a classic baseball stack. I don't expect it to work out, but when it does, the path to the top is easier, not easy. It's never easy. And Cease has been
2 teams I'm considering, and it's for like the exact same reason. One of them is the Rockies, and the Rockies were more popular. When I was doing the strategy show this morning with Waffy, the Rockies off the top of my head were 7% owned. So they were quite a bit more popular, which makes them look different now. You want to guess who the other team is that I'm really strong considering for single entry right now?
Yeah, it's clearly Baltimore.
Yeah, Baltimore, same sort of deal where we don't have all that much ownership going to them. They do have more ownership than the Rockies. There's also a much better offense. And also, I think they have a slightly easier matchup. As good as Detmers is, I still think Cease is the better pitcher. But the Orioles offense is considerably better than the Rockies. And this is a team, well, sure, they have 6% ownership in large field tournaments. In small field stuff like single entry, I think they're going to be comparably owned to the Rockies and be like 2 or 3% owned or something.
I don't disagree with that. And I think I do think that they look really similar just because you're right. Baltimore is much better than Colorado. Matchup is probably slightly better for Baltimore because Detmers isn't as good as Cease. But then you factor in the Coors Field aspect. And while you're probably right, I do think at the end of the day, Colorado will still be slightly less owned than Baltimore. So I think they're just really similar. And I wouldn't fault you at all for choosing Baltimore just because the bats are so much better. That said, Baltimore running out like a C+ lineup today. You've got some cheap bats in there, but a little bit worse than normal.
Yeah, we've got the Baltimore Orioles pulling it up here. We've got, because it came out about 13 minutes ago, it is Henderson, Rushman, Westberg, Santander, Urias, Mullins, McCann, Cowser, and Mateo. Jackson Holiday, the hype. Obviously, he's still the top prospect in baseball, but it does seem like in general, people have soured quite a bit on Jackson Holiday, have they not?
He's been awful to start his career, but again, really small sample size. So no Holiday, no Mountcastle. Westberg's been really, really good, though. The bump up to 3 is nice to see for him.
And also, this came up earlier. I can't remember who the pitcher was that wasn't projected as a starter earlier. But yeah, so Albert Suarez is not projected. Bobby Kamen says FanDuel doesn't have Suarez starting today. Yeah, they're just wrong. I think
it was Freddie
or DraftKings.
Freddie Peralta, I think you're talking about.
No. Earlier today, so Freddie Peralta.
No, last week.
One,
yeah,
but earlier today also there was a different pitcher who was on today's slate that was projected to not start over on FanDuel. I can't recall off the top of my head who it is, but yeah, they just don't have correct lineups and starting pitchers, and I don't know, probably once every 2 or 3 days, if not even more frequently than that, you're going to get the wrong lineup info from them.
100%.
But yeah, they do have Grayson Rodriguez projected as the starting pitcher. If Grayson Rodriguez picks up ownership on FanDuel because of this, it would be hilarious. He's $10,800 on FanDuel, not actually starting, and he's listed as the probable pitcher on FanDuel.
Yeah, I can't see it, but even if one person rosters him, I mean, that's all you need.
Guess the ownership. Is it going to be, what do you think the ownership, assuming that they don't update this, what would you guess the ownership ends up being on Grayson Rodriguez?
He's so expensive, but still in like the large field on FanDuel, 1%.
Yeah, I'll say like 0.7% or something like that. But
yeah,
it'll help pay for some of the rake, assuming that they don't update it. Josh Blondin, Josh is guessing probably like 0.8%. Well, Sotex says 5%. If the answer actually ends up being 5%, I will play lineups exclusively on FanDuel for MLB DFS the rest of the season if Grayson Rodriguez is not starting as 5% owned on FanDuel. That would be awesome. That would be awesome. But yeah, we've got the starting pitcher. It's Albert Suarez tonight for the Angels. Watch him get scratched and something weird happens now. But yeah, Suarez starting pitching for the Angels tonight. Any other possible considerations for single entry? As of right now, I'm in agreement with you. Rockies or Orioles, you're getting a lot of leverage against super popular starting pitchers who I think could potentially be upwards of 60 to 70% owned in single entry contests. So I like stacking against one of them. If we're talking about large field contests, I think you just have to play a lot of the Padres. Do you not?
Yeah, I agree with that, just because you can get to so many combinations of them there. And even in like the smaller field, higher dollar stuff, I don't mind the Padres. You have to be conscious of the ownership. I like the Orioles and Rockies because of what we said, but I also don't think you have to go to those teams either. Like anyone else besides the Padres in Atlanta, to a lesser extent, Toronto, is not getting ownership. So a team like the Marlins against Bryce Elder coming in with nice leverage. I could see myself playing some Miami here.
Yeah, the Miami Marlins. Let's see, what was my exposure to the Marlins? Marlins are showing up in not actually all that many lineups for me. So Marlins might be a difficult one for me to really want to rally behind against Bryce Elder, but they're a little bit under-owned, not all that much ownership going. It is a massive park upgrade for them because Atlanta, way better hitting park than Miami, which is one of the most pitcher-friendly parks that we have in baseball. We also got a question from Discord, and this one was coming to us from Einsteinium, who wanted to know, do we have any interest in the Minnesota Twins tonight, Matt? So the Twins are a team that's picking up some ownership on DraftKings. They're relatively contrarian on FanDuel. What stands out the most about the Twins, though, very cheap. They have now the second best odds of being the top overall value stack. Chicago White Sox a little bit higher. The problem with the White Sox, though, against Chris Paddock, just what are you doing with the salary savings on this slate? It seems very unnecessary. So is the Minnesota Twins going up against Jonathan Cannon, is that a team that you have interest in?
Not really. I can't do it. Ever since Albert Suarez carved them up, I just can't go back to the Twins. So no, all jokes aside, not really. The ownership's there. I get it. They're really cheap. If there was expensive pitching I loved on this slate, they would be in play for me, but there's not. So they're not.
Yeah, so that's a team with like the Twins. I don't think I'm going to make very many 5-man stacks of them, but in scenarios where I need salary savings, I think good secondary stack, good for one-offs because I am getting exposure to, all right, let's see. If I go to my players here, filter by the Twins, I could let you guys know who, yeah, like I said, not a lot of 5-man stacks of the Twins for me as of right now, but Ryan Jeffers, Alex Kirilloff, Jose Miranda, Edward Julian. These are all hitters I have exposure to in the teens. So that's where I like this team. Secondary stack, good option to save some salary with. That's where I think there's a lot of utility for the Minnesota Twins today. And then as far as other stacks go on the slate, is there anything else that is of importance to you or think is worth discussing?
Yeah, part of the reason that I really don't mind your argument about Baltimore over Colorado, Colorado's really hard to stack. Like, even if you use 2 of the middle 8K pitchers, they're really expensive. I mean, matter of fact, they have the lowest top value stack percentage of any team on the slate. So that's part of the reason they're not getting ownership. And inherently, it makes me like them more because of that. The problem is actually putting that into action and rostering them because it's really hard to do so.
Yeah, as far as other stacks, I've kind of talked about the things that are most important to me, other than I like the Toronto Blue Jays quite a bit for today as well against Brady Singer. Field is getting there 10% ownership, but we've got top stack odds that are about comparable to that. So large field tournaments, I'll be looking at the Blue Jays quite a bit as well. But nothing else that's really showing up in a lot of my lineups. Dan06712, who, by the way, shout out to Dan. He added us on Twitter. Was it this morning or late last night? I saw it this morning when I woke up, so I can't remember exactly what time it was that he sent the message. But shout out to Dan, who I saw won one of the mini max tournaments for basketball yesterday. So love to see the success there. Dan's been sweating the games out with us all night over in playback for basketball. And then he says he's getting some crazy exposures for 115 lineups. He's got 80% of Fernando Tatis. Would I suggest a global exposure cap? I honestly, for large field tournaments, I have no issue just jamming the Padres. I think it's the best team to get to by a mile. It's very rare that we're going to have teams that are projected for 16% ownership that are still showing out as being like the most under-owned team on the entire slate in the top stacks tool. I say jam them. I jam them in large field tournaments.
I agree, especially if you're playing a lot of entries. That's how I see it.
Josh Gillum asked, nobody on Chris Paddock today. I have some exposure to Chris Paddock, but he's not a priority for me.
Nah, he stinks.
Yeah,
I think
he's
awful.
Not good. Not good. And it sucks because just another pitcher has been a victim of injuries. Do you remember when he first got called up? And I hate to just have the exact same talking points on Live Before Lock that I did on the strategy show, but I still think it's relevant again. Do you remember when he first got called up? He got called up around the same time as Pete Alonso, and it was a very hotly debated topic. Would you rather have Chris Paddock or would you rather have Pete Alonso? Who should win the Rookie of the Year, Pete Alonso or Chris Paddock? Over time, the answer was clearly Pete Alonso, but injuries have really gotten to Chris Paddock. He hasn't pitched really at all the last couple of years. He's been terrible so far this year. On the positive, his fastball velocity is still there, but he's never been able to develop his secondary pitches. And he lost so much time of development as well because of all the injuries that he's had. That's hard for me to want to get to Chris Paddock. He's just another pitcher I'm going to have like around 10% of or something.
So insert pitcher against the White Sox. They're all in play, and he gets that matchup today. I actually would flip this around, though, and think the White Sox, like, if this were a slate with really expensive pitching options that weren't getting a lot of love, I would be comfortable, or I would be fine with stacking the White Sox here. We don't have that, though, so it's a matter of what you just said. Like, what are you doing with the salary? I don't even like the expensive pitching options. So, yeah, I think Paddock's in play just because of the matchup, but he stinks.
Yeah, he's just the guy that exists on the slate, which is a lot. It's one of the reasons we got away from doing the game by game format for baseball in the strategy show in the morning, because it's too frequent that you're looking at exposures of pitchers and stacks, and it's just like, hey, this team is 6% on, I have 6% exposure to them. Like, it's kind of hard to really go in-depth analysis on that. So that's where we kind of go more to formats now, where it's like we could just kind of let you guys know who the priorities are that we're really building our lineups around. And that's with Chris Paddock. He's just a guy who's going to be in some lineups for me that's no kind of real sort of priority. But let's do our home run picks, and then we'll turn it over to the Live Before Lock guys. So do us a favor if you haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, don't forget, this is the final chance to sign up for NBA playoff promo. So if you want access to our NBA Sims Max package, you want to get 50% off, sign up today or forever hold your peace. Last opportunity to sign up using the link that we have below. Matt, who is your home run pick of the day? And also, people in chat, let us know. Who are you picking at a home run today? What's your pick, Matt? No Coors Field players. No cheating and being a pussy today. You got to go with somebody outside of Coors Field.
I'm going to go with someone from your Baltimore stack. Give me Jordan Westburg on fire, hitting third today. Give me Westburg.
He's the first answer from YouTube as well. SportsWiz said Westburg bomb. So he went with Jordan Westburg as well. We got T. Kim going with Sanchez. Sotek's going with Acuna. Jose Mora went with Max Kepler there. Let's see. Which way do I want to go? You know, as a hitter that isn't picking up that much ownership, that now as I'm looking over my lineups, I'm well overweight to the field to him on, is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Single-digit ownership going to Vlad. So he's somebody who's in about a third of my lineups. I'm going to pick Vlad. Vlad is my home run pick for the day. We've also got some other ones coming into the chat here. Arcathelza going with Pete Alonso. Slim Lancaster's going with Colton Cowser, another standout hitter for the Orioles. Just print these incredible prospects. I know Holiday struggled so far, but all these other ones look like they've been
they got more coming too.
Also, Holiday's the first one they've called up in the last couple of years that hasn't just been a stud immediately. Rushman, Gunnar Henderson, Colton Cowser, all these other guys get called up and they look like big league players immediately.
They got
Josh
more
Bell
too.
From Michael Roundtree, Sharp Square going with Sheets, Flim Flam Man, Kirilloff, Devin Neiman's going with Anthony Santander, Malukar's got Gurriel, Bryce Sox has got Ozuna, Alvin Demary is going with Bobby Witt Jr., Mighty Quinn is going with Paul Goldschmidt. Mark Curry says Olsen to break the slump. Yeah, Matt Olsen hasn't had a hit since like the War of 1812 or something. It's been a minute since he's gotten on base. So, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you want to check out our NBA show, that's going to be on right afterwards. It's also going to be coming up on in playback right after this. And then after NBA Live before lock ends, myself and Josh, we're going to stick around in playback, sweat out the NBA games and watch them in there. So if you guys want to watch the basketball games, why not watch it with Josh and I in playback? So hope to see you guys there. So other than that, good luck with your lineups, guys. Peace out and see you in about an hour.